One thing I've been meaning to do for quite a while now is put out something touching upon this topic of examining the very deep deceptions of scientism as pertaining to microbiology and allopathic quote unquote medicine and things of this nature. And I absolutely have to credit Kirk from Curious Life of a Flat Earther for really bringing this topic to the forefront of my mind. He really just does an amazing job of showing the very clear parallels as to how once we start to really understand things as we began taking more critical look at cosmology and astronomy and things of this nature, or what we could call, the macroverse. And once you just start to realize just how much pseudoscience is really going on and how many things have been pushed upon the public, which really have not been proven scientifically at all, but are the result of just elaborate theories and presumptive speculation and so on. And so, first and foremost, if anyone is not familiar with his channel, I absolutely encourage everyone to go over there and subscribe and to check out all of his videos, which are just excellent. But he's done about 3 or 4 now on the specific topic of the deceptions with infectious diseases and viruses and things like this. His most recent one dealing heavily with the HIV/AIDS deceptions, which is absolutely fascinating. So I'd just like to thank him for all of his amazing work and what an inspiration it's been to many of us. And just keep up the great work, Kirk. Love what you're doing. And he also has a great way of just adding humor into it and a little bit of tongue-in-cheek into things to kind of help you laugh so you don't cry, because obviously these are pretty dark topics if you really look at it. But I think for many of us now who are starting to understand just how much, not just how many lies have been perpetrated through the likes of organizations like NASA or the pharmaceutical industry and things like this, the more we learn about how there's been so much misinformation and outright fraud in terms of things like vaccines and so many other things. It's funny how it does seem to be this sort of Pandora's box that just keeps going and going, like just peeling back layer after layer of deception, and this is no different. Obviously, you have the same plain motivational factors of the profit motive, but also on a more sinister level, just the eugenics agenda. And the more we really look into this, it really becomes pretty chilling when you understand on how many levels that has been carried out in terms of, the fluoride in the vaccines and genetically modified foods. But even beyond that now, as I've been learning about just nutrition in general and how things just, like the food pyramid that many of us grew up with our whole lives, and what we've been told is a balanced, healthy meal is really pretty upside down. It's pretty backwards from what is really good for our bodies, and demonizing fats and counting calories and all this. So yeah, that's a whole. So there's many things we could talk about, but. And I don't pretend to be an expert on this, and I realize that the more you dig into these kinds of things, when you start getting into questioning the medical establishment, it's one thing to question, the NASA, existence of space and things like that, but I know that once you start questioning the status quo of medicine and health, you're definitely inviting an even more deeper level of scorn upon yourself, and that's probably why many people are. Even myself, I think I'm probably a little more cautious to get into this, but every time Kirk's put out a video on this, it just has prompted me to want to start researching more myself and start looking into a lot of these connections. And so I'm still kind of in the beginning stages of that, and I've really found it interesting, the stuff that he has come up with in terms of just digging into the actual process involved of things like, the electron microscope and how that works. And like I said, go check out his videos, and It's pretty eye-opening, and the more you look into it, the more you start to see these kinds of parallels between the ways that data can be taken and can be either manipulated or just flat out hoaxed in the first place. And even if we're serious about coming to this place of feeling a sincere need in a right and obligation to question everything when it's coming from these same control centers, these same institutions, these same financial backers and so on. This is definitely on the list. So even though I haven't looked into it extensively, I don't pretend to be an expert on anything. One thing that I have been poking around with lately is just, for whatever reason, the specific topic of something called the bacteriophage, which is allegedly a type of virus which specifically attacks bacteria. And I'm sure most of you have seen these types of images and pictures. I think I'm sort of drawn to this because I specifically remember being in high school, sitting in science class and seeing these pictures and kind of just marveling at the idea, being taught that these things called viruses existed, and that they were hearing the teacher explain that they were kind of in this bizarre in-between category of being sort of alive but not really alive. They don't have all the textbook characteristics of life, of biological life, but in some ways, because they reproduce, somewhat lifelike, and just really being just astounded by the question of how such a thing could even exist in the first place, and if it was something that was that if did God really create viruses, or did man create viruses, or, as most of mainstream science will tell you, that they are just a product of evolution. And this is what I think is one of the most telling aspects of it all, that really makes it worthy of further scrutiny, is when you just start to really step back and look at how evolution itself, the theories of biological evolution and macroevolution are really the philosophical presuppositions that are in place, which all of this research on viruses and bacteriophage were built upon. It's the foundation that it was all built upon. And this should be alarming. And once again, so similar to the kinds of things we're realizing about astronomy and cosmology, whereas so much of the quote-unquote science that is being done, and that even people who don't believe in evolution have accepted coming from astronomy, even though it's completely based on evolutionary assumptions. But it's just, we've missed it. We've missed like how much pseudoscience is really going on, because it's all predicated upon an evolutionary bias. And when you really start looking into this topic, it's once again, it's the same thing. Specifically, I started looking into this group of men called the phage group, which consisted of, among some others, but primarily men such as Max Delbruck, Salvador Luria, and Alfred Hershey. And when you start, and this is around the mid 20th century when they supposedly did all their main work, but the early 20th century, Delbruck came from Germany originally, and then studied in France and England, and so I think all of these men had sort of, at least two of these guys had connections with the Pasteur Institute in Paris, which keeps coming up again and again. But then interestingly enough, upon eventually making it to the United States prior to World War II, Delbruck, we see fellowships being granted by groups such as the Rockefeller Foundation, as well as affiliations with the Carnegie Institute and Columbia University, and all these sorts of institutions and groups, and we start to follow the money and see a lot of these, the same actors and the same fingerprints on things. It's, if you kind of know what who those folks are all about, you start to see the writing on the wall. Where there's smoke, there's usually fire. So Delbruck also studied at T.H. Morgan's laboratory at Caltech, and T.H. Morgan was an evolutionary biologist of first degree. So this is what compels me more and more as I look into this and just see how interwoven it all is with the researchers in evolutionary biology. So bottom line is, once again, you have this evolutionary angle, and once you really stop and think about how, how do these bacteriophages really function? They're not a cell. They're just this. Even mainstream science describes them as somewhat like a biological robot or a machine, and this has prompted a lot of people to think that they were created by man. They are artificial, some sort of weaponized nanobot designed to inject DNA or RNA into a host cell and cause disease and everything. But I'm not here proposing some specific theory or anything. I'm just at the point of, whether it's suggesting that these are artificial creations or just simply non-existent in the first place. But I think all questions are should be on the table right now. What I think we can rule out is that these things just evolved, as science tells us, through evolution, biological evolution. So once you take that piece away, it really does force you to kind of go back to square one. So that's all I'm trying to do, and look into this more and just not be afraid to question everything that we hear from these very, very dubious sources who have lied to so many times in the past. And as time goes on, the lies become more and more out in the open. So very, very bizarre.